G'day yet again everyone, and welcome back to the vlog. It is currently 3:30 on a Thursday afternoon. You already know I'm heading into Crown to play some 2-5. I've been away from the poker room actually for a week since I've had the flu, unfortunately. It's pretty awful having the flu. The whole time I'm sitting there just thinking, if I could do anything right now, I really wish I could be playing poker. But you can't because you're sick. You can't get everyone else in the poker room sick. You can't really focus or play well when you're sick yourself. So all of that's in the past now. Now I'm feeling much better, over the flu, and ready to get back to some poker. So let's go. It is 4:20 here in the Crown car park, just walking into the poker room right now. I'm going to hop on the 2-5 list straight away, see if we can get some hands going. Pretty keen this week after having been away for a week. Just very keen to get back into some poker action, so hopefully we can get some good hands for the vlog as well. So it's about 10:30 PM here back at Crown. I've just decided to wrap up my session a bit earlier than I typically would. I was just running very bad, and to be honest it was starting to annoy me a bit, so I decided to get out of there before I start tilting all my money off. We'll get to the hands that I played, but there was plenty of big pots, and I did not win most of them, as you'll see pretty soon. G'day again everyone. It is currently 2 PM on a Friday afternoon, so I've actually waited until the next day to record the hand histories from last night. It was too raw. It was too much to go over last night after the awful session. So I've come back now to deliver the bad news to you guys. Hopefully it's not that bad. Hopefully we can learn a lot from the run bad last night. But it starts off straight away. First hand, I'm in the big blind with Queen Jack of diamonds. There's two early position lips, and then the player on the button decides to raise it up to 35. Then the small blind folds, so the action's on me, and I actually can see reasonably doing any three of my options, either folding, calling, or raising. I don't think I'm going to call here, just because the 35 is a bit too steep to see a flop with Queen Jack of diamonds, so I don't like that option. Then I think folding's very reasonable. The player on the button's representing a lot of strength when he opens so large. I think just to get out of the way with Queen Jack would also be a very reasonable move. I, however, decide to go with the third and most exciting option. I 3-bet it to 140, and then one of the early position players actually decides to call this raise. This is very concerning. I think when he calls this large 3-bet, it's very likely that he's limped in early position with a very strong hand. Probably not aces or kings. I feel like he would probably just go all in with those pre-flops, but definitely ace-king, pocket queens, pocket jacks, maybe a few other hands like king-queen suited, but obviously very concerned when he calls, would rather everyone fold, and everyone else does fold, so including the button raiser. So I'm just heads up with the early position / 3-bet cold caller, and then the flop is 8s, 8, 4 rainbow, no diamonds, and I actually decide to check to just give this one up. Not really looking to bluff someone who can potentially have a lot of strong ace-x hands here that are absolutely never going to fold. And even if he did have a hand like pocket queens or pocket jacks, well, one, I block those. But even if he did have those, I'm not thoroughly convinced he wouldn't fold to a shove here. So I do decide to go ahead and give up. With my queen jack here, I check, and then he checks back. So we do see a turn, and the turn is the 9 of spades. So we do actually turn a gut shot to a 10, which kind of makes me like ripping it in here, just because we know we're going to have equity against anything that the opponent might call with. However, I do decide to check it, just with the concern that when he does check back the turn, he has some hand that has showdown value, and he's unlikely to fold that to a shove. I'm really not looking to bluff off my stack first hand I sit down. Even though I did start to do it pre-flop, I've sort of changed strains now. I'm not looking to bluff it off. And then when I check, he goes ahead and bets 100, and I fold pretty quickly. Next hand, I have ace-queen suited. I raise it up 15. I get 2 callers. And then the action folds to the small blind, who decides to go ahead and 3-bet to 60. Then the 3-better, he gets called in the big blind by a short stack who has about 200. So the action's back on me now. And I have a choice here. I can either call the 60 and play ace-queen in position, or I can go ahead and mix in the 4-bet. The reason I don't like calling is because if I call the 60, it's very likely that the 2 players who have position on me are also going to call the 60 as well. And then we're just going 5 ways to a flop, and it's pretty much just playing bingo and not poker at that point. So instead, I decide to go ahead with the 4-bet, hopefully to try and get all in with the short stack, and then potentially also get heads up with the 3-better. I go ahead and make it 200. Then the action folds back around to the small blind, who 3-bet, and he's in the tank for a bit, and ultimately he decides to fold. And then the short stack in the small blind, he's like, whatever. He just puts the big blind, the short stack in the big blind, I should say. He's just like, whatever. He puts the money in. The board runs out without an ace or a queen. It's just a jack-high board. I'm not really sure if I'm good or not until the big blind shows jack 4 of clubs. So he's going to take down that one. Looks like the run goods at least ceased momentarily. Let's see if we can run good in the next hand. So for the next hand, there's an early position limp. Then the cutoff decides to raise it up to 20. Then the action's on me, on the button. I have my favourite hand in all of poker, pocket aces. Obviously a hand I'm going to want to 3-bet here. I go ahead and make it 75. Then the action folds back around to the early position limper, who decides to call the 75. There's been a lot of limping and calling 3-bets this session, as you can see. He decides to call the 75, and then so does the cutoff. So we're 3 ways to a flop. The flop is 8-5-5 with 2 diamonds. The action checks to me. I think this is a spot. I'm definitely going to want to 3-bet for value, try and get called by an 8. Any of the overpairs, something like pocket 9s, pocket 10s, pocket jacks are all hands I could definitely see either of these opponents having. Definitely looking to get value from those. And bet 120. Then the early position player calls and the cutoff folds. So we're heads up to a turn. The turn is an offsuit 6, so a pretty inconsequential card, I should say. And then when the early position player checks to me, he only has 250 behind. There's already over 400 in the pot. I think it's a pretty no-brainer decision, but to go all in here, which is what I decide to do. And then the early position player, he thinks about it for a bit, and then he calls. So obviously loving the situation there. And then the river runs out with an offsuit deuce, so not worried about the flush getting in or anything. I show my pocket aces, and then he turns over pocket 5s. So my opponent actually flopped quads there, and then he decided to go for the slow roll there. Okay, so the hijack opens to 20, the cutoff calls, then the action's on the small blind, who goes ahead and 3-bets to 90. Then I'm in the big blind, and I look down at pocket jacks. This is actually a pretty gross spot with pocket jacks. I could see doing any three of the potential options here. I could see folding, just because the small blind might be raising a very strong range of hands that jacks actually loses to. I could see just calling, trying to see a flop, see if you can outflop the guy in the small blinds, and I could also see going ahead and 4-betting for value, which is ultimately what I do decide to do. I go ahead and make it 220, and then the initial raiser actually decides to go all in for 300. Then the cutoff folds, and the small blind, he decides to go all in for only an extra 180 to my 220 bet. So he goes all in for 400, and the action's back on me. Obviously, getting a price this good, I'm never folding a hand as strong as pocket jacks, but obviously I'm somewhat concerned that either player could have a better hand. But I do go ahead and call, and then the board runs out king high, and the small blind shows pocket kings, and he actually scoops the pot there with his top set, and nothing for me with my jacks. Lose another big one. Sort of been the trend of the session. So, okay, this next hand, it's a pretty unique one. You'll see why in a minute. The under the gun player raises it up to 15, and then all of +1, +2, low jack, high jack, and the cutoff all call. So everyone is playing in the pot so far. Then I look down at the button, and I have king queen offsuit. I actually put this hand up on Instagram to see if people preferred 3-betting or just calling here. Ultimately, I did decide to just call. I definitely think 3-betting to just try and get everyone out of the pot is definitely a legit option. However, I decided to just call in position, play this pot, see what develops. I do also have the concern that the under the gun player is raising a strong range of hands, and that squeezing against them may not necessarily work in this spot. So I go ahead and call, and so does the small blind and big blind. So we are 9 ways to a flop. Yes, you heard that right. 9 ways to a flop. The flop is queen 6 deuce with 2 diamonds. So flop top pair here, but obviously on a wet board and with 8 other people to play against, it's a bit of a dicey spot. The action checks to one of the infield callers, who was in +1. She goes ahead and shoves all in for 220, and then the action folds around to the hijack, I believe. It was a hijack, I do remember. And they decide to just call the 220, and then the cutoff folds, so the action's on me with my king queen here. I have about 500 in my stack after losing the last hand, and this is actually a pretty tough spot here, and I've been saying this a lot this session, but I could honestly see doing any 3 of the options. I could absolutely see just folding here. With so much action behind, it's very likely someone has a stronger hand than king queen. Either of these two could have ace queen, either of these two could have pocket 2s, pocket 6s. Even if they did have a hand like queen 6 suited for 2 pair, I would not be surprised at all. However, I don't decide to fold, just because I do think that it's somewhat possible either of them could have a flush draw, either of them could have a worse queen, queen jack, queen 10, etc., that they're just shoving for protection. Even if they shoved a hand like pocket 9s for protection, I wouldn't be that surprised in this game. So I take folding out of the question, and so then does it become, do I want to just call, or do I want to rip it in? And ultimately, I do decide to go all in, just because if I do call here, I'm only going to have about 280 less than that in my stack into a pot that's already over. It'd be over 700 at that point, which, like, I'm just never folding on any turn, so I might as well get it in now, which is what I do. I go all in, and then the action's back. The next three players fold, they're still in the hand too. You have to keep in mind with so many people in the pot pre-flop. But then the action does get back around to the hijack player who called the 220. He thinks for a bit and then he eventually calls the bet. So then the board runs out without a diamond. I show my hand. The early position player who went all in, she shows Queen Jack. So we're going to beat her in the hand. And then the hijack player actually mucks his hand. So as much as I was complaining about running bad, we do win a massive pot here. We just top. So 9 people to see a flop. Somehow we end up beating 8 other people here. And we scoop in that pot with the King Queen there. So looks like our fortunes are starting to turn around with that hand. Next hand, I'm in the low jack with pocket 10s. I go ahead and make it 15. And then I get 3 callers. So we're 4 ways to a flop. The flop is 9-6 for rainbow. The small blind checks it to me. I go ahead and throw in a c-bet for value here. I go ahead and make it 40, and then only the small blind calls. So we're heads up to a turn. The turn's a bit of an interesting one. It's the Jack of Hearts. When the small blind checks to me, I think I still want to bet this turn for value. It's because the Jack doesn't really change much. If my opponent still has a 9, they might call. Or maybe they'll be a little bit more tentative to call because it's an overcard to their, what was flop's top pair. But in terms of no straights got there, there's a backdoor flush draw now, so the board actually only gets a bit more wet. So I do decide to go ahead and put in the value bet, try and get called by a 9 potentially. I bet 120, and then much to my surprise, the small blind actually decides to go ahead and raise it to 300. I wasn't really expecting this once I bet, but once he does 3-bet, I definitely think it's possible he slow played a set on the flop, so pocket 9s, pocket 6s, pocket 4s, all potential hands they could play like this. And in addition, the Jack actually does change something in that now we lose to Jack 9. So obviously those are all the hands that we're losing to here with the pocket 10s. If my opponent is bluffing, it's probably with a hand like Queen 10 suited or 10-8 suited or maybe potentially a heart draw. And the reason I like folding pocket 10s when that's his bluffing range is that the fact I have pocket 10s with the 10 of hearts actually makes it less likely that he is using one of those hands, and more likely he has one of the stronger hands he's raising for value. So I just go ahead and fold the pocket 10s there. Next hand, we have a early position limp. Then the low jack decides to raise it up to 25. The action folds to me on the button, and I look down at ace king. Obviously this is going to be a hand that I'm going to want to 3-bet here. I go ahead and make it 90, and then the small blind actually decides to cold call the 90. He only started the hand with about 300, so he's calling off about a third of his stack. But nonetheless, the action folds back around to the pre-flop raiser, who actually decides to fold. So I'm left heads up with this short stack, and then the flop is 8-4-4 with 2 spades. Small blind goes ahead and checks it to me. I think I have a pretty easy decision just to move all in here. I'm only betting about 210 effective into a pot that's already 200, over 200 actually. So I go ahead and move all in, and I get snap called by the ace jack of spades. So I have a lot of outs to fade, any spade, any jack. And then the dealer starts to deal out the turn card, which is actually the Jack of Hearts. And then the river's the 4 of clubs, so gonna lose that one yet again with the ace king. I did get it in good on the flop, fortunately, but not able to hold there. Another big one we've lost on this session. Next hand, I look down under the gun. I have my favourite hand again, pocket aces. I raise it up to 15, and then 3 people call in front of me until the small blind decides to go ahead and throw in the 3-bet. He makes it 80. Then the action's back on me with pocket aces here. If I'm going to 4-bet any hand, it's going to be pocket aces, obviously. I don't think this is a good spot to try and trap with the aces. With 3 people in between me and the small blind, much happier to get it all up, even if it is pretty obvious I'm strong when I 4-bet. And I do decide to 4-bet, I go ahead and make it 200. Then the action folds back around to the small blind, who decides to call. So then we're heads up to a flop. The flop is 9-6-2 rainbow. And then the hand gets kind of funny because the small blind, he actually decides to lead bet 120, which is obviously a pretty small bet into the 400 pot. But with pocket aces here, I'm not really that concerned about him having a better hand. Maybe pocket nines if a 3-bet pre-flop. That might be a hand I lose to, but other than that, looking to get it all in for value with my pocket aces here. I just rip in my remaining 300, and then he's like, oh god, you always have it here, you always have aces. Call. He goes ahead and throws in the call. I show my pocket aces straight away, like, yeah, you're right, I had aces. And then the board runs out Jack, Queen, and then he turns over pocket jacks. So I was, obviously this session I've been running pretty bad, and I get stacked here yet again, even though I did get it in good yet again. I think if you can't tell by the tonation in my voice, I was starting to get pretty annoyed at this point, and I decided to just leave the casino and quit while I'm still behind, before I get behind by even more. So I pretty much just had it after that hand and decided to storm out of the casino, which would explain the video you saw earlier in the vlog. When I start to run really bad like that, I'll be 100% honest, it does affect my play. I definitely lose focus. I definitely can be prone to tilting off some money. So I just decided to leave the casino early before any of that stuff started to happen. So that's going to wrap it up for this vlog. Hopefully get another one out to you soon. I hope I run better in that one. Maybe you guys liked watching me suffer a bit, watch me run bad a bit. So if you guys gain some entertainment out of the run bad, then hey, I'm glad some good came out of it, at least. So come back to you with another one soon. Until then, peace.